DND number 6, The Worth of Souls in Jesus' Name. Chapter 1. Jeff Davis's apartment, North Los Angeles, California. Jeff yawned. Laura's attempt at getting his attention were working. He'd had a tough day and hadn't gotten home until almost 8. He'd been tired and not in the mood for much of anything, but she'd ordered pizza and bought wine, and finally he'd begun to loosen up. The movie they'd watched had been boring, and it had been all he could do to stay awake. It seems though she knew just how to get to him. Yes, his energy was definitely surging. He rose slightly off the couch, just enough to push Laura down onto the cushions. Finally, I have your attention, she cooed. Her statement made him think. She often complained about him not giving her his full attention. She had a point, he had to admit. They'd been a couple for several months now. She'd even moved in with him, yet they were not getting closer. If anything, he was drifting farther away. However, it was the times like right now when she was able to pull him from his shell that kept him in the relationship. Besides, it was too much trouble to find someone new. But really, what was the purpose of that kind of relationship? He lowered himself to kiss her when his cell phone went off. Oh, no, Laura said, a warning tone in her voice. Absolutely no, she ordered. Honey, you know I have to answer. No, you don't. It's just that you care more about everyone else than you do about me. Not true, he argued. Shaking his head, he moved toward the dining room table where he'd tossed his wallet, keys, and phone when he'd come in a scant 4 hours earlier. Laura grabbed his arm as he passed. I'm serious, Jeff. Let it ring. Come back here and finish. Whoever it is can wait. Laura, let go. I'm on call. I have to answer. Besides, it's almost midnight. It must be important. He twisted his arm away from her and rushed to the phone, but it stopped ringing by the time he scooped it up. Peering down at the number, his brow furrowed. It's Jeffy. Who's Jeffy? Eric and Shelley's teenage daughter? When she appeared to not recognize the name, he shook his head at her. Laura, we've been together over 6 months. How can you not know who I'm talking about? Eric and Shelley Keno, you know, Ricky Keno's father and Brianna Adams' mother. He didn't wait for her reply as he hit the call back button. Jeffy answered quickly. Jeff? She cried into the phone. Yes, Jeffy, what's wrong, sweetie? He asked, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. He could hear her sobbing and sniffling and trying to get her breath. Jeffy, answer me. What's happened? Jeff, can you come get me? Where are you? I'm at the Best Western on West Coast Highway near Newport Beach. What are you doing there? He barked. Another loud sniffle. Don't yell at me. Okay, just calm down, he said, not sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. I'm not yelling at you, sweetie. I'm just worried about you. I mean, you're 15 years old and you're out at a motel at midnight. Where's your father? No, she cried. You can't tell my father. You can't tell anyone in my family. That's why I called you. Jeff ran a hand through his thick blonde hair, a sick feeling settling in his gut. Jeffy's father was the legendary martial arts master Eric Keno. Her brother, the famous martial arts movie star Ricky Keno, and her sister was another movie legend, Brianna Adams. Her mother was a martial arts champion. Jeffy had two more brothers, Mark and Joey, also both champions, and all were friends of his. He knew them because he worked as an agent for Ameritech Security, a company run by Jason Lee, who was a longtime friend and student of Eric Keno. He'd first met them 8 years ago when Jeff was a 22-year-old newbie agent. He'd been asked to help bodyguard the Keno family. An agent had been assigned to each family member because some sicko had threatened to kill them. Jeff had drawn Brianna, the movie star, which had almost been his demise. She'd drugged him and left him unconscious on the beach and taken off. She had almost lost her life that day, and he'd almost lost his job. Probably would have if she hadn't intervened with Jason. Jeffy, whose real name is Juneflower, had only been 7 back then and had been very attached to him because, as she put it, he was cute and had the same name as her. Now she is a teenager. She is also a genius, a child prodigy. At 15, she is halfway through her college stint and will be a doctor by the time she's 20. Add in the fact that she's psychic, has visions, is a fourth degree black belt in more than one discipline, plays concert piano, and is startlingly beautiful. One could say, oh yes, Jeffy is special. And now she's calling him at midnight and asking him to keep it a secret from her extremely lethal family. Jeez. Jeff, will you come and get me or not? She cried. Well, of course I will. I'm on my way, he said, blocking out Laura's loudly indrawn breath. What room are you in? She gave him the information. Jeffy, listen. I'll be there in about 30 minutes. Is there a peephole in the door? She sniffed. Yes. Okay, do not open the door to anyone but me. You got it? Yes. Hurry, Jeff. I'm on my way, and when I get there, you and I are going to have a long talk. Okay, she said petulantly. Pocketing the phone, he sat on the couch and began putting on his socks and shoes. I can't believe you're leaving me to go see that spoiled brat. Sighing, Jeffy shook his head. She's not spoiled. She's actually a good kid. Oh, yeah, great kid, out at midnight and asking you to come rescue her. Let me tell you something about that kid. She has her sights on you. Don't be ridiculous. Jeffy is only 15. I'm twice her age. He finished tying his shoes and turned toward her. You're acting as if you're jealous. He stood and went back to the dining room and grabbed his wallet and stuffed it in his pocket. I'm not jealous of that little kid, Jeff, but I am of your job. You're always on call. That's an exaggeration. I'm not always on call. Still, I will admit, Laura, my job is important to me. It's all I've ever wanted to do, and being on call is part of the job. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous? Would you act like this if I were a doctor being called away to cure a patient? He didn't wait for a response. He turned away, and she followed him into the bedroom and watched as he strapped on his shoulder holster and gun. At least if you were a doctor, I'd have a good excuse for being alone all the time. My friends would at least understand that, but not this stupid rent-a-cop thing you've got going. He froze, his jaw clenched. Great. He had no idea that's how she thought of him. But the truth comes out. Do you know that Ameritech is a highly respected security consulting firm that handles extremely important accounts worldwide? Did you know that we've been asked to work with the FBI many times and that we've been held up as an example for law enforcement agencies across the country? Did you know that the owner of the company trains the people who train the Navy SEALs? I've worked my way to be one of Jason's top agents. Do you understand what that means? When she didn't answer, he turned away. No, Laura, I'm not a doctor. I am what I am. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. She shrugged. All it means to me is you're never here. His eyes focused on the far wall. Look, I have to go. We can talk about this when I get home. And when will that be, Jeff? He only shook his head at her and started toward the front door. If you leave tonight, I won't be here when you get back. Jeff stopped. I have to leave. If you can't handle that, I'm sorry. He opened the door and left the apartment, forcing his mind to focus on the situation at hand. Jeffy. New scene. Jeffy, open the door. The door swung open and Jeffy threw herself against Jeff. He wrapped his arms around her. There now. You're okay. Everything's okay. Gripping her arms, he pulled her away long enough to satisfy himself that what he'd just said was true. She appeared to be fine. What happened, Jeffy? Why are you here? Oh, Jeff, it was so terrible. I'm so stupid. Now, I'm sure that's not the case. Come on, step inside and we'll talk a minute. He backed her into the room, making sure the door closed solidly. Jeffy slumped down on the bed. Jeff pulled a chair out from the small table by the window, turned it backward, and sat down across from her. What happened? She shook her head and gathered her long, curly, dark tresses in one hand and flipped them back over her shoulder. It's so hard, being so young and being in college. I just wanted to know. You wanted to know what? What it was like. Sex. Jeff swallowed. Sweet Jesus, Jeffy, what did you do? Oh, don't start getting all crazy on me. I didn't think you would judge me. Judge you? No, Jeffy, I'm not judging you. I'm worried about you, and I'm worried about what your parents are going to say. Well, you don't have to worry about me. It didn't happen. He blew out a breath and raised his eyes heavenward. Thank you, he whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled over onto her beautiful cheek. Oh, come on now, Jeffy. Why are you so sad? Try to understand, Jeff. It's like having a grown up brain inside a child's body, she said softly. College kids, they talk about sex all the time, how great it is, how they crave it, how good it feels, how it makes you want to scream. Jeff did his best to keep a straight face. I understand the physiology of it, and of course I've seen movies and read books, but I've never experienced it for myself, and everyone else has. I just wanted to know what all the fuss was about. I wanted to know how good it felt to turn yourself over to another person and allow them to give you mindless pleasure in such an intimate way, you know? Jeff swallowed. Yes, I understand where you're coming from. Jeffy sighed heavily. So, I know I shouldn't have, but I talked to Blake. I talked Blake into bringing me here. Blake, huh? You talked him into it. Well, it didn't take much talking. Well, I'm sure. What's his last name? Why? Because I'm going to kick his butt and then have him arrested. You can't do that, Jeff. It wouldn't be right. He didn't know I'm only 15. How could he? He's a senior, and I'm in his biology class, and no one at school knows my age. Besides, I told him I was 18. Jeff sighed, shaking his head. So, he brought you here? Yes, I sort of, came on to him and suggested the motel. After that, everything happened so fast. I bet. Once we got here, I lost my courage. Something didn't seem right. He started taking my clothes off me, and I guess I felt ashamed when he looked at me, so I stopped him. And he wasn't very happy about that. Jeff sat up straighter. Did he hurt you? No, I wouldn't let that happen. Jeff realized it was a silly question. This girl was the daughter of Grandmaster Keno. She could probably kill with a touch, like Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. Still, all males have a huge physical advantage over females, even highly trained females. Jeffy, if he did things you didn't want him to, you can tell me. Well, it wasn't like that. I don't know why I acted the way I did. It's supposed to be fun, right? Fun and exciting and pleasurable, right? He drew out a breath. Jeff suddenly felt way out of his league. Maybe you should talk to your mom about this, or Bree. She shrugged. Just tell me, Jeff. What was I supposed to feel? He kissed me, and it was just cold and slimy. He took my clothes off and saw me in my underwear, and I was really embarrassed. And he tried to do stuff, like touch me intimately, and I had to stop him because it just felt too weird. Was that bad? Should I have let him do it and just get it over with? Jeff ran a hand through his hair. No, sweetie, you did the right thing. Your first time should be special, and when it's right, you'll know. You won't feel weird or embarrassed. He pressed his lips together firmly. So, what did this guy, Blake, do when you made him stop? Jeff asked, even though he felt sure he already knew the answer. Oh, he got real mad. He called me a tease. He yelled at me about him having to buy dinner and pay for this motel room, and I told him I would pay, but he was so mad, and he cursed at me so much it finally made me cry. Then I tried to explain to him why I did what I did. When I told him I was only 15, he just totally freaked. He grabbed his keys and took off. Oh, hon, Jeff said, shaking his head. He moved to the bed and put his arms around her, and Jeffy crawled up in his lap like she used to when she was little and let him hold her. I'm sorry you had to go through all that. Guys can be real jerks. She shook her head. It was all my fault. I don't know what I was thinking. He stroked her hair as he held her. You were thinking it's time you grew up and learned all about life. I understand that. She looked up. You do? Of course I do. She sighed heavily and sat quietly for a few moments. Finally, she looked back up at him. Jeff? Yes? You could teach me. Teach you what? You could teach me. About life. About sex. Oh, no. He stood up so fast he practically dropped her on the floor. Tossing her back onto the bed, he went to stand by the door, instinctively intending to put as much space as possible between them. Jeffy, Jeffy, that's very sweet. Really, it is. But, hun, you're only 15. I'm 30. So, back in the 1500s, that would make us both adults. Oh, we don't live in the 1500s, and in our time, that makes you a child and me a criminal. When she looked as if she might cry again, he moved forward and knelt down in front of her. Jeffy, you flatter me, sweetie. I'm not kidding or making light of anything, but that's not going to happen, so just wipe those thoughts out of your brain. Now, we need to get you home, and I guess I need to speak with your father. No! Another deep sigh from Jeff. Sweetie, you need to talk to your parents. You need to let them know how you're feeling about things. They'll help you work through this. You have to know that. But you don't understand. Maybe not. But I know your mom and dad and brothers and sister love you very much. I know they do. It's just that, well, I can't tell them what I've done. They'll be so disappointed. They know I know better. I think you're wrong there, Jeffy. They'll understand. My family, they're all so perfect, you know. Jeff nodded. There was no arguing there. And I don't want them to know that what an idiot I am. Besides, one of my brothers would probably try to murder Blake. Please, Jeff, please promise me you won't tell them. Jeffy, you're putting me in a very bad position. Please, Jeff, don't tell them. Your mom would be devastated if she knew her own daughter didn't feel like she could come to her. Sighing, Jeffy nodded. You're right. And I never want to hurt my mom. Tears welled in her eyes. Ugh, this growing up thing is so hard. She wiped the tears from her eyes. Okay, Jeff, I promise. I'll tell Mom. Jeff smiled. Good, Jeffy. I feel so much better, don't you? Just not right away. I need time to think about things first. Jeff blew out a breath. You promise you won't say anything to my parents until I have a chance to do it. Okay, I promise, he said with a sigh. She smiled at him. He rolled his eyes. So, let's get you home. I can get you past the security gate, but sneaking in is all up to you. How in the world did you get out of the house in the first place? I'm supposed to be spending the night with a friend. You outright lied to your parents? She hung her head. Yes. It's the first time, I swear, and it feels terrible. Good, it should. Come on, get all your stuff and get in the car. He opened the door and stood there waiting on her, and when she approached, she smiled and stood on her toes and leaned close and kissed his cheek. Thanks, Jeff. I must have a death wish, he muttered. New scene. Consciousness came back to Mackenzie slowly, easing in as a soft gray around the fringes of her mind. She knew she was still in the van, the big black one that had pulled up in front of her as she jogged down the street in her own safe neighborhood. She knew because she could feel the motion of the road beneath her back and could smell gas and exhaust. Not yet daring to open her eyes and interact with her captors, she tried to calm her racing heart. Her head pounded, tears burned her eyes, and she ordered herself to get control. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a full-grown woman with a master's in English working on her second novel. She remembered she'd been ecstatic to get published. She grasped onto that happy time in her life to block out what was presently taking place, but she couldn't hold on to it. Suddenly, none of that seemed very important. Someone's shoe tapped her leg. She alive? A man's deep voice asked. For now, another answered. Good, because I need her alive for what I have in mind. Oh, Lord, help me. This isn't like that, man. We don't touch her. Our orders are to help her, are to hold her secure until we get the word to off her. Yeah, well, what the boss man don't know won't hurt him, right? I mean, she's dead anyway. We may as well have our fun. I said you don't touch her. Sex leaves evidence. But you're such a pussy. Maybe it's you I should. She heard an indrawn breath, a scuffle, grunting, and the sound of flesh hitting flesh. Someone tripped over her legs. The van swerved. "Hey, you two idiots, give it a rest before I shoot both of you." The voice had come from farther away, and Mickey assumed it was the driver. It sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Let go," she heard the one with the deep voice say. "You better watch what you say," the one called Butch warned. "Next time you open your mouth like that, you're the one who's going to be screwed." There was a grunt as Mickey supposed the Butch guy was letting go of the other one. The excitement over, Mickey forced herself to think. Who was this boss man, and why would anyone have her kidnapped? Of course, her family had plenty of money, at least her stepfather did. He was in the middle of a campaign for his second term as senator of the great state of Washington. After that, president, he kept saying. Yeah, right. Mackenzie had no idea how much he was worth, but she assumed he was rolling in it from the lifestyle he'd provided for her and her mother and her little sister, Marissa. Marissa. The thought of her sweet little sister had her grimacing. She supposed if someone had to be ransomed for her stepfather's money, she was glad it was her and not little Marissa, who'd been born when Mackenzie had been 13. Sweet Marissa. Everyone loved Marissa. She was everything Mackenzie was not. She was quiet and calm and obedient and content and kind and non-judgmental. As far as Mackenzie was concerned, Marissa was the only good thing that had come from her mother's horrible decision to marry Talman Daly, the bane of Mackenzie's existence. Just the thought of Marissa having to go through this ordeal made Mackenzie so sick her stomach heaved. Lord, she hoped she didn't throw up, because now that she was more awake, she realized she was gagged. She'd drown in her own vomit. Trying to move her arms to remove the gag made her realize her arms and legs were also bound. The predicament she found herself in seemed so very surreal. This kind of stuff didn't happen, did it? Not in real life. Yet it was happening. She had been going for her morning run. A van had pulled up in front of her and stopped. Two men had jumped out and grabbed her. She'd been inside the van in about 2 seconds. She'd fought, but one of them hit her in the jaw, and that's the last thing she remembered, until now. And now it was all she could do to stay calm and think. Yet all she could think about was she didn't want to die. And what she wanted probably wasn't going to make a bit of difference. Someone kicked her leg again. "You're awake, aren't you?" It was the one called Butch, and when she didn't answer, he kicked her again, and she opened her eyes. New scene. They'd been driving for over 12 hours. The only reason she knew that was because it'd been around 6 in the morning when they'd taken her, and it was dark now. 12 hours meant they could be as far as 2 or 3 states away by now, supposing they'd driven east or south. Surely there was no way they could have headed north and crossed over into Canada, not with the hostage lying in the back of their vehicle. The ride was excruciating. Her head felt as if it may explode, and she feared she soon would lose control over her bladder. And when she heard the crunching of gravel under the tires, she hoped that meant that they had arrived at their destination, but it turned out to be at least another 30 minutes before they finally rolled to a stop. She'd been so uncomfortable she almost cried with relief, except that arriving at their destination also meant she was one step closer to her death. The side door opened and the men stepped out. Mickey gratefully breathed in the fresh air. It was Butch who turned and lifted her and carried her toward a small cabin that appeared to be in the middle of the woods. He carried her through the main living area into another small room and tossed her none too gently onto a single old-fashioned bed with a metal headboard. Then he turned and closed the door. Her body trembling, she watched him as he approached. He looked her over. Terror overtook her, and she found herself struggling to breathe. He came forward and placed a knee on the bed and bent over her. "I'm going to take the gag off. I want you to be very still. If you scream, the only one who will hear you is Richard. And believe me, you don't want him to come in here. Do you understand?" She nodded her head. Leaning over her, he released the gag and pulled it away. She drew a deep, large breath. "Thank you," she whispered. His hand gripped her cheeks. "Don't thank me. Later you'll wish you hadn't." I I need to use the bathroom." He nodded his head, drew a knife and cut through the duct tape that bound her, then pulled her into a sitting position. "Can you stand?" "I think so." He took her wrist in a steely grip and pulled her up. She swayed. and he put a hand out to steady her. Come with me. Butch led her out of the room and pushed her toward a door on the left. She glanced around, trying to take in as much detail as possible. As far as she could tell, the cabin had 3 rooms, a main living area, a bedroom, and a bathroom. The living area held a sofa and a chair facing a fireplace. There was a small niche in the left corner of that room. There was a tiny kitchen with a table and 2 chairs. The man Mickey supposed was Richard was sorting through boxes of supplies, and she heard the van drive away. Butch opened the bathroom door and shoved her through. Mickey looked around the small room. There was no window, which she figured was why Butch had let her in here without being watched. As she quickly used the facilities, she took note of the rest of the room. There was a stand-up shower and a tiny sink with a used cake of soap lying on the edge. No real towels, however, a small aluminum bucket sat under the sink holding a roll of paper towels. Rising, she glanced in the mirror that hung over the sink. There was a bruise on the side of her face, and her eyes appeared to be those of a stranger. She knew if she didn't come out of the bathroom soon that Butch would come in after her, but dear Lord, she didn't want to go back out there with those men. They were her killers, waiting for an order to off her from some person playing God. No, she sure didn't want to leave this room. She felt like giving in to her grief and sinking down onto the floor and having a good cry, but that wouldn't help anything. Slowly, she turned the knob and opened the door a crack. Butch was talking to Richard, his back to her. Eyeing the front door to the cabin, she wondered if she could make it outside. No way for her to sneak. She'd have to just make a dash. She had to try, didn't she? And she had to act quickly before Butch turned back toward her. Heart pounding, she counted to 3 and took off. Mickey flew from the bathroom, crossed the main room in 2 steps, grabbed the door and jerked it open. Jumping off the porch, she was in the woods in mere seconds. It was pitch black, and she ran blindly. Either instinct or too many movies had her running a zigzag pattern. It felt so good to run, to be free. Could it be this easy? Maybe it was because of the rushing sound of her heart in her ears that she didn't hear Butch behind her. The next thing she knew, she was tackled from behind. She hit the forest floor, the air leaving her lungs in a giant whoosh. Butch wrestled her around onto her back and straddled her. Mickey flung her fist out at him, swinging wildly at his face. Stop it, he barked. Like she would listen. She kneed him in the back and kept right on swinging. He tried to gather her hands together, but her movements were too frenzied. I said stop, he yelled just before he slapped her. Mickey winced at the sting, yet she couldn't let a little pain deter her from her goal. She bucked, trying to dislodge him from her stomach. Unfortunately, he finally got control of her hands and pinned them beside her head. He leaned close to her, placing his mouth right beside her ear. Listen to me. You can make your last days on earth torture, or you can pass them in relative peace. The boss man hears I can't control you, and Richard gets a shot. And all he wants to do is drill your fine self. You got me? Please let me go. Please. I can tell you don't want to hurt me. Please. You can't tell squat. Well, what if my stepfather pays the ransom? You keep acting as if he won't pay. What if he does? Then you'll let me go? Either way, you're dead. Why? Can't you let me go once the ransom is paid? Please. I don't want to die, she pleaded, her eyes boring into his. Don't give me that scared little girl look. Bad things happen. That's life. He jerked her to her feet and drug her back to the cabin. This time, when they got to the room, he slammed her on the bed, pulled out a set of handcuffs, and cuffed both her hands over her head to the antique metal headboard. Will you tell me why, or at least who? Mickey sobbed. Who is this man who wants me dead? Who is he? He stared at her in silence, his jaw tense. You're better off not knowing. He turned away, then turned back. I'll be back with something to eat later. He left the room. New scene. Jeff hurried to the door, wondering who would be pounding on it this early in the morning. Normally, he'd be worried about whoever it was would wake Laura, but she'd been true to her word. She'd been gone by the time he'd returned the night he went to rescue Jeffy Keno. She'd come back the next day, all haughty, along with some guy she worked with, to retrieve the rest of her belongings. She'd brought her coworker along as if she'd had something to fear from Jeff, and that really got to him. Jeff had wanted to shoot the guy right between the eyes. That would have gotten rid of the self-righteous look on his yuppie face. Oh, yeah, Jeff thought as he imagined that look of surprise when the bullet first struck. He'd entertained himself with the thought many times over the past 2 days. If this was Laura again, he was going to give her a piece of his mind. He snatched the door open. What are you? He stopped cold, because Ricky Keno stood at his front door, his arms folded over his chest. Ricky. Rick nodded. Jeff? Jeff sighed and waved him in, turned from the door and headed toward the kitchen. Ricky stepped in and closed the door behind him and followed Jeff. Uh, to what do I owe this honor? Jeff asked as he spooned coffee into the coffee maker that Laura had purchased for the apartment. Ricky took a seat at the bar that separated the kitchen from the tiny dining room and tossed a scandal mag on the counter. I thought you might want to explain this. Jeff poured in the water, hit the button, and sauntered over to the counter, focusing in on the paper in front of him. On the front page was a slightly out-of-focus picture of Jeffy and him, standing in the doorway of a Best Western motel room. The headline read, Keno's Kid Sister Rendezvous with Lover. Jeff's face paled as he took a step back. I swear, Rick, it's not what it seems. Well, let's talk about what it seems, Jeff, Ricky said calmly. Jeff eyed him suspiciously. He knew the calm voice could be deceptive. Ricky went on. It seems to be the middle of the night. It seems you and my little sister are at a motel, and there are more pictures on the inside of the paper that makes it seem like the two of you are quite cozy. One where you're all wrapped around her, and one where she's kissing you. Jeff swallowed hard. Rick, I'm no rocket scientist, but I'm also not stupid. I swear to you, I would never mess around with Ricky Keno's baby sister or Master Keno's underage daughter. Ricky grinned. Hell, Jeff, I know that. I just wanted to watch you squirm for a minute. Jeff heaved a sigh. Great. Well, I'm so glad I could offer you some entertainment. Shaking his head, he gestured at the magazine. When did that come out? Yesterday. I've already tracked down the shooter. It was the hotel clerk. Apparently, Jeffy and some guy checked in near the end of his shift, and he recognized Jeffy. Thinking to have the scoop of the day on a celebrity's little sister, he waited until the end of his shift, drove his car around to have a clear shot of the room, and waited. And then you showed up. He says you were there about 15 minutes, and then you and Jeffy left together, and he has no idea what happened to the other guy. Well, I do. He freaked and ran when Jeffy finally told him that she was only 15. Ricky drew a deep breath. So, what's the rest of the story? She hasn't told you? No, and I'd like to find out before Dad and Shelley see this thing. Jeff shook his head. I can't tell you. Excuse me? I promised her I wouldn't tell her parents. I have to keep my word. I'm sure you understand that since you're all about honor. Well, I think you have me mixed up with my father. Bull. Play it off if you want. I have eyes in my head. Ricky Keno is honor personified. Anyway, she promised me she would speak to her parents. She said she needed to wait and to think about things, but she would tell them, or her mom anyway. Well, I'm not them. Savvy? Turning his back, Jeff poured himself a large mug of coffee and faced Ricky, leaning back against the kitchen counter, one ankle crossed over the other. He didn't bother offering some to his guest. He knew Ricky never touched the stuff. I'd offer you some tea or some other weird crap like that, but I don't have any. I'm good, and you're stalling. I'm trying to decide if I'm breaking my word by talking to you. Jeff, do I need to find this guy, have him arrested, kick his butt? Jeff shook his head. Not his fault. Poor guy had no idea Jeffy was as young as she is. Are you kidding me? She looks like a baby. Are you kidding me? She has breasts and curves and a tight body, not to mention that long, curly mass of dark hair and those huge brown eyes. She's like a young Shelley, but with your coloring. She's a knockout. Okay, I'm not comfortable with this conversation. Jeff laughed. She's growing up, Rick. Admit it. Geez, time is flying by. Yeah, way back when I first met you 8 years ago, you weren't even married. Now you're what? 38, married with 2 kids. Doesn't seem like it, though. I feel like I'm still 20. I guess it's all that clean living. Whatever, back to the story, Jeff, and bottom line, is my sister still a virgin? When I delivered her back to her home, she was. What she's done since then, I can't say. Ricky's brow furrowed as his mind went to work. So it was her idea to go to the motel? She's trying to lose her virginity? Something like that. And the guy somehow found out how old she is and took off, and she called you for a ride home because she didn't want any of us to know what she'd done. Pretty close, only it was Jeffy who decided she couldn't go through with it, and the guy got pretty mad. Ricky scowled. Did he hurt her? Jeff chuckled. You and I think more alike than you know. No, he didn't hurt her, but he did upset her enough to tell him the truth about her age, and when she did, he took off. And she called me and and asked me to come and get her. Ricky nodded his head. Hey, thanks for being there for my sister. No problem. So, Jeffy wants to know about sex. Yeah, she even asked me to teach her. Rick looked up quickly. Really? That's interesting. He began to chuckle. She put you in a predicament, didn't she? To say the least. Guess it runs in the family. What do you mean? Well, when Bree was 18, she practically begged me to relieve her of her virginity. Grinning, Jeff shook his head, thinking about the beautiful movie star. Wow. Every man's dream. And so I'm guessing you were the one who did the deed? No, I wasn't. I don't do casual sex. So I turned her down. It was heck of a hard thing to do. You're a better man than me. Ricky laughed. No, really. I'm sure turning down the finest piece in America was difficult. Hey, watch how you talk about my wife. Jeff shrugged. Well, there are worse things to be labeled. Rick sighed, thinking about his first time with the woman who was now his wife made him want to head home. He cleared his head. Shelley needs to know about Jeffy's newest obsession. She's going to be upset that her own daughter didn't feel she could come to her about it. I guess I'd better have a word with Dad and put the burden on him. Great idea. When all else fails, turn it over to someone else. Well, he's the only one that can handle Shelley. Handle Shelley? Do you think she knows that's how you feel? No, and I'd appreciate those words staying between you and me. Rick looked around. So, where's Laura? She left me, Jeff said, shrugging it off. She was mad when I had to leave the other night to rescue Jeffy. And when I got back, she was gone. Oh, man, Jeff. I'm sorry about that. For the best. I don't think there was any love lost. We were used to each other, and it was easier to stay together than go looking. However, the other night she let me know that my career was an embarrassment to her. Ouch. You're a top agent. Pretty respectable in my book. Yeah, well, thanks. You want to be my new girlfriend? Ricky grinned. Sorry, I'm taken. So you got anybody else in mind? I'm sure Bree can fix you up on a blind date or two. Oh, yeah, that's just what I want to do. Let me give you an emphatic hell no. Shrugging, Ricky raised his eyebrows. Bree knows some real lookers. I understand you're not interested right now, but who knows, down the road, on a lonely night. He let the implied sentence go. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. When I'm ready, should I look that up under Bree's call girl services? Funny. So what now? I've got a couple weeks of vacation coming. I'm going to drive up to the lake home I bought last year and do some work on it and get in some shooting. Are you going alone? I guess I am now. That place is pretty isolated. Leave an itinerary and check in. Will do, Mommy. That is the end of chapter 1.